And now, marine weather around Alaska.
All right, tonight's weather showing low pressure tracking in toward Nunivak Island here. And winds will diminish here along the coast and even over the interior, but will stay pretty blustery with a lot of rain here from the Selawik, Kobuk Valley, Kotzebue, right across the Seward Peninsula down to Bristol Bay. Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians, Pribilofs, wet, dry out to the west. And then rain continues Kodiak Island as the front slowly drags across the area. Increasing south and southeast winds here across south central Alaska with increasing areas of rain away from the downsloping areas here. Also rain pushing across more of Prince William Sound. Dry with high pressure over the southeast coast. And tomorrow that high tries to hold but can't quite do it. The front pushes in, slides some rain into the central and northern southeast coast, but the southern areas stay dry. Rain across all of southern Alaska here with gusty winds, Copper River Basin, and locally over portions of south central Alaska, but stronger winds down here across the Alaska Peninsula back up toward the Pribilof Island areas and the eastern Aleutians as well. And the next system out there to the west pushes some rain to Chimney-Attu as early as late tomorrow afternoon. That whole system takes a jog off to the east and southeast here, just north of Atka by Wednesday afternoon, with more rain and wind here pushing eastward into the eastern Aleutians and to False Pass there, and probably not getting into Cold Bay until evening time. Dry over the northern Bering Sea with light winds and clearing. Scattered showers here over the western, or actually for Kuskokwim Valley up in toward the northeast interior. This front brings a chance of light rain and snow to the western central Arctic coast of the Berks Range and stays wet here across south central Alaska, North Gulf Coast, and into the Panhandle. Coastal forecasts wind-wise here. Not too bad for the south coast tomorrow. West-southwest, 10 to 15 knots, seas at about 6 feet. South to southeast winds on the central coast, 20 to 25 knots, with winds getting stronger as you head north and northwest there along the coastline, with 25 to 35 knot winds out of the east-southeast with seas up to 12 feet for the extreme north coast. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, south winds 10 to 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Northwest at 15 for Clarence Strait with seas at 3 feet. And for the day on Wednesday, south to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots on the south coast, south 15 to 20 on the central coast, and lighter winds now up north there, south to southeast at 15 to 20 knots, seas 7 feet, and south at 20 for Clarence Strait, Stevens Passage there. Looking at small craft advisory winds, 25 knots from the south. Gale warnings for Lynn Canal, southeast winds 35 knots. Prince William Sound, gale warnings tomorrow, east winds 35 knots, seas 9 feet, and gale warnings also for the eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast winds at 40 knots with only 8-foot seas, and south 25 with 8-foot seas for the western North Gulf Coast, about the same for the Barren Islands, and southern Cook Inlet and Kamishak Bay, small craft advisories. South winds 25 to 30 knots with 7-foot seas, northern Cook Inlet winds out of the east at 20 knots. With 5-foot seas. And for Wednesday, variable winds at 10 knots for Cook Inlet and Kamishak Bay, seas down to 2 to 3 feet. Barren Islands, westerlies at 15 knots, southwest at 15 for the western North Gulf Coast. Lighter winds for Prince William Sound there, down to 20 knots out of the southeast with 3-foot seas, and 20 knot south winds there for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 25 knots for the day Tuesday. And the Alaska Peninsula, pretty windy, southwest 30 to 35 knots, seas up to 11 to 14 feet. And Bristol Bay, southwest winds 25 knots, seas at about 7 feet. And then for the day on Wednesday, west winds 25 knots for Bristol Bay with 7-foot seas, and south to west or southwest winds 20 to 25 knots Kodiak Island. Alaska Peninsula, west to southwest winds mostly at 25 knots. Gale warnings for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow. West winds 35 knots, seas up to 17 feet. Adak and Atka, west winds at 30 knots, and west winds here 20 to 25 knots from the west and southwest for the western Aleutians. And then on Wednesday, west-northwest winds 20 to 40 knots here for the western Aleutians. South to southwest, 30 knots for Adak and Atka. And for the eastern Aleutians, south to southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, south at 20 tomorrow. Otherwise, light east winds at 10 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, east at 15 for St. Lawrence Island. And St. Matthew Island, northwest winds at 30 knots. Same wind pattern going on for the Pribilofs out of the northwest at 30 knots, but seas there up to 15 feet. And for the day on Wednesday, St. Matthew Island and the Pribilofs, light variable winds at 10 knots, sea subsiding down to 4 to 6 feet. Light northerly breeze there for the northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island, and the Yukon Delta coast at 10 knots, northwest at 10 for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, and real light winds for Norton Sound, just 5 knots out of the northwest. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, east-southeast at 10 knots, east at 15, central coast, and east to northeast at 10 knots for the western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea, east at 15. Chukchi Sea on Wednesday, light winds, west-northwest breeze, 5 to 10 knots. Western Arctic coast, west-southwest at 15. Southwest 15 on the central coast, and the eastern coast, west winds, 10 to 15 knots.